Okay, thank you so much. We'll see if I can maintain the energy of that walk-in music. I don't think I will be able to, but I'll give it my best. So I kind of get to be the bad cop a little bit, because we just heard about all the amazing things that the animal movement has accomplished, and I'm mostly going to be talking about gaps, going to be talking about learnings, going to be talking about things that we can steal and improve from other movements that have done similar sorts of things, other cause areas that might have done some things better or worse than us. So kind of the inspiration for this talk is I really think sometimes we get invested in our own movement and we forget to look outside. We forget that other people have faced similar social challenges, similar organizational growth issues, similar pain points to what we're going through right now. And some of them have got through this really well and gives us a lot to learn from. Others have struggled. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from other movements. And it's really easy to be focused on your own movement. And I think it's great that so many people here are focused on animals. That's what we should be doing. That's what we should be focusing on. But a little bit of information can go a long way. So I asked a bunch of people, a bunch of experts, 20, so it's not really extensive, a few questions. Questions about our strengths, questions about our weaknesses, questions about our bottlenecks. What is the thing that's limiting the animal movement from having more impact? And mostly I was trying to look at this from an ecosystem perspective. So I wasn't thinking about a single organization or a single thread, more like as a movement, what are we missing? More like 5 years from now, if our movement was doing twice as much good or 5 times as much good, how would we get there? What's the infrastructural aspects that we'd want to change? What's the cultural aspects we might want to change? What are the things we should be doing different? So first, let's start with some of our biggest strengths. And I thought these were pretty interesting because I don't think these are all strengths that we've always had as a movement. I think some of them are actually quite new. One interesting one that came up a lot when I talked to the experts is high coordination and collaboration. And I think that this is partly because we all really genuinely care about the same things, and we kind of recognize that other people are doing different strategies and approaches, but it still makes sense. Interestingly, people even brought up low infighting as a strength of our movement relative to other movements. Who would have said that about the animal space 5 years ago or 6 years ago? I mean, I think there's been an active effort to work on this, though. I mean, there's a talk going on right now about why we shouldn't infight in a movement, and there's been talks like that going on at all sorts of conferences, and I think it has gotten better. My perception, I think many people's perception of the animal movement is that we have become more coordinated. We have become more organized. There's more collaboration. There's more coordination of information and shared resources. People don't feel quite as my org needs to succeed, your org needs to succeed. We all need to kind of fight over the narcissism of small differences. I think there has been a little bit of a more realization that we probably all do need to work together in a consolidated way. And we get a lot of benefits from doing it that way. Another big strength is willingness to update on what works. Again, as we saw from the opening talk, we've tried a lot of stuff, and some of it has worked brilliantly, caused a lot of good and a lot of benefit to tons of animals. Other stuff hasn't worked. And I think our movement has been willing to look at some of those hard truths, kind of stare them in the face and be like, oh crap, this strategy isn't working, we need to do something different. This new thing that worked really well, wow, we should get 10 orgs to do this. We should really move and scale this across the entire movement. And I think that allows us to get better and better as a movement, better at strategies, better at techniques, better at even micro interactions, like, hey, maybe we shouldn't spend so much time infighting, maybe we should spend some more time kind of fighting the top battles that we care about. So I think that's been a huge benefit of the animal movement, and I hope that that really continues. And then one we have had for basically ever is a really deeply committed core of activists, volunteers, and full-time workers in the movement. I think people genuinely care in a way that's really, really rare, even across other social movements. You don't see that many people in mental health or global health willing to go to jail for their viewpoints. That just does not happen. It's a really rare, special, precious thing. And I really should make sure my slides stay up. And I really think that that's a core we want to hang on to. There we go. That's a core we want to hang on to even as our movement grows, because we're going to get bigger. And the default thing is that we're going to lose some of that deeply committed core of ideology and perspective and people who are really willing to lay it out on the line and have huge self-sacrifices to make this movement work. But I think we want to hang on to that. And I think so far we have. We have a lot of this still dedicated core even as we've grown a lot bigger as a movement, even as we've gotten more professionalized in a bunch of ways. There's still this kind of like attitude of really just caring about this issue more than most people care about anything. Okay, that's it for the good stuff, I'm afraid. Now we get to focus the rest of the talk on our weaknesses, areas that we can work to improve and build. So let's talk about some of those. One is building a broader base of support. So one of the problem with really caring, with kind of being a nut, with kind of being willing to go in jail for your viewpoints is it's pretty far away from most people in the world. And I think historically, and to this day, we're not that good at engaging with broader bases of support. We're not that good at talking to people who are really different than us. We're not that good at kind of making peace that they just need to agree with us on this issue and we really need to get them over the line. I'll pick on conservatives as an example. I mean, this is 50% of the world. This people who are voting for right-leaning parties is incredibly common and prevalent, especially in the key countries that we're working in. We've got to be able to talk to these people. We've got to be able to get these people on side. We have to be able to make this a movement that is not a very specific niche of person, but is a broader niche of people who can at least agree on that issue. Doesn't mean we have to agree with them on everything. We probably won't. There's a line which is, we make peace with our enemies, not with our allies, something like this. Like, we need to be able to engage that broader base. And the political spectrum is one thing, but there's tons of things like this. I mean, international work in the animal space has been tough. We've had trouble kind of getting inbound and getting big movements in many other countries. So that's a thing we need to get better at. It's been tough engaging with different age demographics. You know, you look around, you're going to see remarkable consistency in the type of person who becomes an animal activist a lot of the time, and we have to get broader than that. You can't win as a social movement just being a niche of a niche of a niche. We got to be able to at least socially engage with the people outside of that. Next thing, kind of double-edged sword on this one, in that I think our infrastructure is actually pretty great, especially great per size. I mean, the animal movement's a very small movement relative to a lot of other social movements, relative to a lot of other charitable cause areas. And we actually have some pretty good infrastructure. We have pretty good conferences, people know about them. We have pretty good funder networks and communities. The coordination there is quite high. We have evaluation of research. We have kind of bodies that interact in collaborations with each other. So I actually think in a lot of ways we're very good at infrastructure. But one piece of infrastructure that came up as a weakness for quite a few of the experts is, how do we kind of develop and retain professionalized talent, and how do we get people to become professionalized talent? I sometimes think of it as a staircase where we kind of, or a funnel is the more obvious one, but I like to think of it as a staircase where people are kind of getting involved in the movement and they have to take various steps to become, at the end of the day, hopefully, a really high impact activist who's doing all sorts of great stuff, maybe making this their life's mission or life's goal. But to get there, we need a bunch of intermediate steps. And I think we have not focused on these intermediate steps, especially with really long timelines. So if we're thinking about something like setting up a student group, where maybe the main benefit of that student group is that we get super talented activists 5 years from now, 10 years from now, who become the org leaders of the future. We have been a bit less good at investing in that recently. I think it's the sort of thing that has been cut. How do we build up the talent base that becomes that? If you look at some of the best impactful things, those people grew up training on stuff like handing out flyers to people and just talking to people about veganism 1,000 times. And then you get good at talking to people about veganism, and that gets you the step that you might need to do something like a political campaign, or to do something like a corporate campaign, or to do something radical and significant where you need a big full-time org with multiple staff working on it. And this ties to another weakness, which is, I think in general, we have been a bit short-term. We really want to win. We really, really care. It really hurts. I know people who can't go to sleep at night because they think about factory farming and they have to try to imagine that it's paused for a minute so they can get some rest. This is on our mind all the time, and it gives us a real sense of fire and energy and wanting to get stuff done, which is awesome. It also means that the idea of doing something where maybe it doesn't impact animals for 10 years is painful. It feels so far away. But as other speakers have mentioned too, it is kind of a lifetime journey that we're going on here. Unfortunately, the odds of us eliminating factory farming next year is basically none. We have to think about what our long-term play is going to be. We have to think about our long-term strategy. And sometimes that means investing in stuff where the impact comes a little bit down the line, where the animals get saved a little bit down the line, but it's 10 times bigger than it would have been if we invested at the beginning. So another way of framing this question is, what's our bottlenecks? What's our limiting factors? What stops the organization from having the success? And these change every year and change around. And I asked these same group of experts with lots of hedges that, it's 20 people, it's not the whole damn movement, and it was tilted a little bit towards the funders in the movement, because those are a lot of people who have broad insights and that I know personally. And it was a very interesting picture compared to, I think, what people would have said 5-10 years ago. The most cited bottleneck in terms of what stops us from being a fantastic movement, what stops us from growing, is talent, people, the individuals in the movement, people who can lead, people who can do specific sort of things. We'll get into what the exact talent that we're kind of missing is, but it's ultimately humans. It's something that we can all contribute to too, which is really nice. There were a lot of people who said multiple systemic factors, great, very difficult to summarize on a slide, okay. A surprising one is that funding was just 8%. Now, that's not to say tons of people didn't mention funding as a possible bottleneck, as a thing that will bottleneck us, but it's less salient than it was in those scrappy days when we had to, get dollars and cents to kind of do good grassroots activism. There is funding bodies, there are entities that are philanthropically funding this as a charitable cause area, which is really, really exciting, and is the default in most charitable cause areas, that there are philanthropy-funded organizations, and that's how they're doing a lot of their growth. So let's zoom in on talent a little bit, because I think when people hear, oh, there's a talent gap, they get this perception of, okay, well, we just need thousands of more people to be involved. We just need lots and lots of more capacity. But I think when I dove a little bit deeper with these experts, that wasn't really what they were getting at. They were talking about specific gaps, specific things that are kind of rare or hard to find. And that doesn't mean we can just build this talent without building a big movement. We probably have to build a big movement to get some of this. But they were looking at talent gaps at senior levels. People who could be the COO of an organization or have management experience for 10 years and could kind of stabilize an org that was struggling with its growth challenges, things like that. Talent in different geographies, so huge gaps in the global south in terms of building up organizations, movements there. And in specific specialist skills. So policy skills were cited a lot. Campaigning skills were cited a lot. These are kind of things that we're consistently missing that we really need to build these kind of on-ramps and trainings and abilities for people to get better for our organization, our movement as a whole, to grow. A lot of people mentioned that long-term talent building has been deprioritized. I think that this is part of our learning and growth kind of evolution. I think once upon a time, orgs were very spread. They were doing 110 different things, and some of those things were maybe not as good, and some of them were maybe really good, but in subtle ways. And it was hard for orgs to distinguish that. So I think a lot of orgs narrowed down, they focused, they became really good at one thing, which overall for the movement I think was great. I think it led us to do some really cool wins that we probably couldn't have done if we had 10 organizations that were spread across 50 issues. But it also meant we cut a lot of the infrastructural building stuff that maybe will lead us to our leaders of the future, our people who are going to do a lot of good work 10 years out. So one specific thing, I think we need student chapters, for example. I think we need places where people are kind of training up their muscle as an activist or as a staff and getting familiar with these issues in a, I guess, more limited fashion while they're in school. They're not going to be full-time or this sort of thing, but I think that's how we get our full-time activists and full-time staff 5 years down the line. The other thing that came up a lot that I thought was really interesting is organizations aren't that good at identifying strong talent. So in general, to have a movement that kind of like properly utilizes talent, you need a big pool. You need a lot of people, you need people with different skill sets and specializations and this sort of thing, but you also need the orgs to be able to look at that pool and find the person who's the right fit for them. Find the person who, if placed in this org, will have way more impact than they would placed at any other organization. And that historically came up as a weakness of the animal movement. I think we do a lot of what I sometimes call sloppy vetting, looking at signals that we kind of hope proxy the thing that we care about, but don't super test the thing that we care about. One thing I know a lot of animal orgs do that I always push back against is they look for experience in the animal movement specifically. We only want to hire someone if they've had 3 years of experience in the animal movement. Hopefully people can realize the problem if every org does that, right? Like it's really hard to get that first 3 years of experience if nobody will hire you, absent that. But I think that's a really common practice, and it's because as an individual org, you want someone you know is dedicated. You want someone you know who's done this. You want someone who has kind of the chops and the experience. But as a movement, if we do that, we create this huge barrier to people actually getting involved in full-time roles. And that is really, really unproductive for trying to build up and staff up. A solution that I think is really interesting in this kind of talent area is there's been more of an emphasis on fellowships and internships and volunteer roles and job shadowing and stuff that kind of bridges that gap between someone getting their first full-time animal job and being involved in the movement as a whole. And I think more of an emphasis on that has been really valuable and is really going to kind of work towards solving these sort of gaps in the long term, because for an organization, an internship or a fellowship, often it's debatable whether it's net positive. You do a lot of training, you're getting people up to speed, and then they're gone pretty quickly. But for the movement, I think if everyone did a few more of these kind of like getting people into the movement type hiring roles, I think we'd end up having a lot more impact. We'd end up having a lot more people to choose from, a lot more talent. Okay, let's think about funding. So this was the most contentious one, and I knew it would be contentious as soon as I came up. I was like, ooh, 8%, interesting. I bet a lot of people in my audience will probably disagree with that that's not really the gap. What people said, and then a bit of my narrative on top, is funding doesn't really seem like the binding constraint. But that doesn't mean that funding gets deployed easily and smoothly and there's not issues with funding. A lot of the time there's a big total volume of money, but there's a lot of questions about, how does it work? How do we actually deploy it? There's questions about absorptive capacity. Can orgs actually handle that much money? And how do funders get confident enough that orgs can handle that much money? There's a lot of concerns about concentration. So, okay, if there's a lot of funding but it's concentrated in a handful of actors, do we miss really great opportunities that we otherwise wouldn't miss if it was more divided, if it was more spread? And even if you have tons of funding, it doesn't really mean that everything good will get funded. For that to happen, you actually need processes, you need systems, you need awareness, you need information about, say, what funders are funding what thing. And a lot of that is pretty obscure and pretty hard to find, information-wise, in the animal movement. It's not obvious. Another thing that happens is we still act like a funding-constrained movement, which makes a lot of sense. We were funding-constrained. We're working off pennies for a super long time. So a lot of the plans and organizations and strategies that people build, they're kind of built to that budget. They're built with the idea of, 100K is a big ask. And if there's funders who are, say, looking at $1 million asks or $5 million asks, they're looking at a different range of interventions or plausible approaches. And that's how our movement needs to continue to evolve. As we get more kind of like professionalized and larger and better funded, thinking about what strategies become available to us. Can we run a Super Bowl ad now? Is that something possible that can be done in the animal movement that couldn't have been done 5 years ago? Would have been impossible to even think about doing 5 years ago. There is a real change into this kind of scope and systems and strategies that we can, in fact, use. Next up, ideas. This is probably where I think our personal bottleneck is, which is interesting. I disagreed a little bit with the experts here. But I think that although we have been evolving and we have been learning as a movement, it's pretty rare that we really test things in a really brilliant way. We've kind of got a bit lucky, where we find something that works and then we kind of like, oh my God, let's scale this, everyone should do this, and that sort of thing. But it hasn't been very systematic, it hasn't been very careful. And our experimentation has probably gone down, again, because the orgs have focused and narrowed and gotten really good at executing those experiments. But a natural flow of that is we're testing less stuff than we were 5 years ago, than we were 10 years ago, despite orgs being generally bigger. I think that in general, we don't have a sense of like, how do we build something that is testable and falsifiable pretty quickly, and then we're able to test at small scale, and then ramp up if we do. So sometimes I see tests that, hey, this could be great, could not be great, but we won't know for 10 years. That's not really a test, or at least it's not a test that informs us very quickly. If we're thinking about how we grow, I think a thing that's really lacking is, what are the one-year tests? What's the 3-month tests? What's something we can try at a really small level of scale and budget? And if it works, it could be really big. But if it doesn't work, it's easy to shut down, and we actually do shut it down, and move those resources elsewhere, maybe to other tests, for example. I think there's big gaps, things we still need to figure out. We don't really have a proven method for a bunch of markets that matter. We don't really know how to work in China. We don't really know how to work in India. We don't really know how to work in a lot of these super high consumption countries. We haven't figured out the playbooks there. So we need to invest in that. Like, again, we can pass all sorts of things in the UK, and that's great, but it's a pretty small country on the global scale. We gotta figure out what are strategies that can cross-apply. How do we modify our playbooks to actually be useful in other contexts? I think in general, the movement undervalues idea generation a little bit, partly because it's kind of on a longer timeline, and it kind of ends up not working a lot of the time. So say you're an org that's plan is to run 5 tests, fail 4 out of the 5 times, and then scale the last bit. You could be that org, and you would fail quite a lot. And people would look at you and go, oh, only 20% of your stuff is failing. Or you can be org 2, and you can look at the 5 tests, wait till they're done, grab the one that works, and do it entirely yourself. Now you're an org that has a 100% success rate, basically, because you're pulling the strategy. But again, as a movement, as an ecosystem, if we don't have the testing itself, where we're actually iterating on those ideas, we don't have that thing that can cross-apply. So even if 80% of orgs can mostly scale and build and work off the things that are working best, we still need that 20% experimental energy. And that probably means a lot of misses. That probably means a lot of misfires. It probably means things that we look back and go, oh, that was really stupid. But as long as we're doing it in a way that doesn't damage the movement long term, and a way that we know that it will be kind of dumb 6 months from now, 12 months from now, very quickly, then I think that these can be really beneficial for the ecosystem overall. I think an interesting aspect about ideas that people really underestimate is that the value of finding a new idea can be really, really massive relative to the value of executing it. You think about something like a cage-free campaign or a technique that works in policy. If we find that, often it can be scaled to tons of different contexts, places, organizations. So the kind of upside of even if you miss 4 times, even if you miss 9 times out of 10, but you find that one thing that is a gem, maybe that ends up being 20 times, 30 times, 100 times as much resources going to that. People, talent, money, whatever. So I think ideas are a really good way to kind of like build out. So I wanted to kind of focus on what are actions that I think we could do in this room things that we could kind of value or change our weighting towards. And I think one of the things that I mentioned is just broadening the conversation. How do we get good at communicating with people who are really different from us? Conservatives, global south, new constituents, people who maybe haven't considered the animal issue that much, maybe people who it's outside of their comfort zone. I spend a lot of time talking to funders, philanthropic funders. Most of them aren't involved in the animal space. Most of them are doing all sorts of other causes. How do we talk to that person for the first time? How do we get animals on their radar as an interesting philanthropic area to invest in or to work in? Second one is, I think, long-term seeds. So thinking about things that maybe do have longer-term payoffs. Again, I want to see intermediate steps. I'm a spreadsheet and measurement guy. I like to see data and signs that this stuff is working, but I don't think it means we have to have impact year one. I think sometimes things take time to build. We ran this program, charity entrepreneurship, basically an incubator for new charities. And a lot of those charities, they got started. We were kind of optimistic. Hey, this seems like a good idea. The project's going to get started. We know how much it costs to start a charity. But those charities sometimes didn't have impact for 3 years after they got founded. It takes time to figure stuff out, especially if you're doing new stuff or stuff in radically different ways than the historical orgs have been. But without that kind of experimental mindset, maybe we don't have Shrimp Welfare Project or something that focuses on an area that was otherwise neglected or an area that otherwise people wouldn't learn from. Finally, the test and learn thing. I think that every organization and activists can think about how do we design kind of minimum viable product tests, smart bets in areas that maybe we haven't been historically fantastic in. Something like policy is a really good example. A lot of social movements have a stronger political angle. They're better at policy than the animal movement is. And we got to figure out how to do that. We got to figure out, is it by placing people into policy directly? Is it party politics? Is it lobbyists? Is it broad-based campaigns where we're getting petition supports and then we kind of put it in the comments? This sort of stuff is just something we need to get good at, and probably we're not going to figure it in the abstract. It's probably something we're just going to have to try 30, 40, 50 different things and then find the thing that works and then scale that out. So that's it for the talk. I have an interesting dilemma when it comes to questions. We have some time for questions up here on stage, but I'm also doing some deeper dive questions in a separate room afterwards that you can kind of find on the app. So I'd say if you have any questions that might apply to a bunch of people, that's super great. You can ask them on the app and you can type them up and that sort of thing. But if you also want to go a bit deeper into, this specific thing I want to go back and forth on, there's also going to be a room afterwards for those sort of conversations. Thank you.